In the quiet town of Dunbridge, whispers of the supernatural had long been part of the landscape, woven into its ancient cobblestones and misty alleys. Yet, no tale held more weight than that of Elias Graham, a ghost who had once been hunted by man and spirit alike, fleeing from a fate worse than death. Elias had lived in Dunbridge centuries ago, a man consumed by curiosity. He dabbled in dark alchemy, seeking immortality not through the body but through the soul. One fateful night, in a ritual gone wrong, Elias died, but his soul did not ascend. Instead, it remained tethered to the world, restless, neither alive nor at peace. He became a ghost, forever wandering the mortal realm, cursed by the very forces he had sought to manipulate. In his spectral form, Elias initially relished the eerie power it gave him. He could walk through walls, manipulate the winds, and observe the living unnoticed. But as the years passed, fear of his presence spread. Hunters both mortal and supernatural sought him out. Ghost hunters armed with relics and ancient prayers hunted him relentlessly, while darker forces sought to consume his spirit for their own ends. Even the living, with their growing knowledge of the occult, became more dangerous, threatening to banish him into oblivion. Elias fled. For centuries, he drifted across desolate landscapes, hiding in forgotten ruins, lingering in places where life had long vanished. The world changed, cities rose and fell, and yet Elias remained, a phantom hiding from those who wished to destroy him. His existence was bleak, filled with constant dread, but somehow he survived. He learned to shield himself from detection, to blend into the very shadows of existence, becoming nearly invisible to all who sought him. But during his years of isolation, something strange began to happen. Elias grew stronger. The longer he remained in his spectral form, the more control he gained over the veil that separated the living from the dead. He could now move between realms with ease, and he found power in the darkness. He no longer feared the hunters. Instead, he felt an unsettling ambition stir within him. One night, as he stood on the windswept cliffs of a forgotten shore, Elias made a decision. He would no longer run. He had mastered the art of survival, and now he would return. Return to Dunbridge, the place where it all began. But he wasn't coming back as the hunted. This time, he was the hunter. As Elias approached Dunbridge, the town seemed frozen in time. But the moment his presence entered the outskirts, the air changed. A chill spread through the streets, and those sensitive to the supernatural felt a creeping dread they couldn't explain. Elias was coming home, and with his newfound power, he planned to reshape the town that had once cast him out. The townspeople had forgotten his name, but soon they would remember. But as Elias stood at the edge of Dunbridge, overlooking the town that had once been his, he hesitated. A figure moved in the mist, a familiar silhouette. His heart, though long still, felt a pang of recognition. Someone from his past still lingered. But who? And why had they waited? The mist swirled, and Elias stepped forward, his resolve firm, but the questions gnawing at the edges of his mind. What awaited him in Dunbridge now? Was he truly the hunter, or had something been waiting for him all along? The answer, veiled in the fog, remained just out of reach. The hunt was about to begin, but for whom? The air hummed with anticipation, as if the town itself held its breath. Elias moved cautiously through the streets of Dunbridge, the thick mist curling around his translucent form like a shroud. The old town looked the same, yet something was different, something he couldn't quite place. His senses, sharpened by centuries of existence between life and death, picked up faint traces of energy, familiar yet distorted. He glided past the crooked buildings and overgrown alleys, memories flickering in his mind. The faces of those he once knew seemed to rise out of the fog, their expressions twisted with fear and loathing. He had been a pariah in life, and in death, nothing had changed. But he wasn't here for vengeance. He was here for something deeper. As he approached the town square, the feeling intensified, a pull, almost magnetic, tugging at his essence. The figure in the mist, the one that had stirred his soul, had vanished, but their presence lingered. He sensed that someone was watching him, but not with the intent to harm. No, this was different. It felt almost welcoming. Elias halted at the edge of the square, the very spot where his failed ritual had condemned him all those centuries ago. The cobblestones beneath him seemed to throb with an energy he hadn't felt in years. The veil between the living and the dead was thinner here, and it wasn't by accident. Something had changed in Dunbridge, something that had drawn him back. Suddenly, a voice soft, almost a whisper echoed through the mist. You returned. I knew you would. Elias turned sharply, his spectral form tense. From the shadows, a woman emerged, her form solid but ethereal at the same time. She wore the clothing of a different era, her dark hair cascading over her shoulders, her eyes, pale and shimmering, locked onto his. He recognized her. Isabel. In life, Isabel had been his closest confidant, a fellow scholar of the arcane, though she had never shared his obsession with immortality. She had warned him, begged him to stop, but he hadn't listened. And now, here she stood, another ghost, bound to this cursed town. Isabel. His voice trembled, though he tried to mask it. How? You weren't the only one who paid the price for your ambition, she said, stepping closer. When you died, the ritual didn't end. It tethered others, me, among them. We've been here, waiting, for centuries. Elias felt a cold dread settle over him. He had believed himself alone in his curse, but now he realized he was far from it. You? You've been here all this time. Yes, she said, her tone bitter yet soft. But not just waiting. Preparing. Elias recoiled slightly. For what? Isabel's gaze hardened, her ghostly form flickering in the mist. For your return. You didn't think you were the only one who grew stronger, did you? The hunters you ran from, they weren't just after you. They've been coming for us, for all of us. But we've learned. We survived. Elias felt the pull again, stronger this time, as if the town itself was reaching out to him. It wasn't just Isabel. There were many more. Spirits like him, trapped in Dunbridge, feeding off the thin veil between worlds, growing in power, just as he had. And now that he had returned, they were ready to act. What is this? He demanded, his voice wavering between anger and fear. Isabel smiled, a cold, hollow smile. This town is no longer what it was. It's a nexus now, a gathering place for those like us. You were the first, Elias, but you won't be the last. We're no longer hunted. We are the hunters. A chill ran through Elias. He had returned to Dunbridge to reclaim his place, to finally put an end to his isolation. But now, he realized that something far darker had been set into motion. The town had become a crucible of lost souls, and they had been waiting for him to return and join them in their twisted resurrection. Suddenly, the fog thickened, and Elias felt the presence of others, dozens, maybe hundreds, materializing in the mist. Eyes watched him from the shadows, spirits whose faces he couldn't quite see. They circled him like predators, silent but expectant. You can't escape it this time, Isabel whispered, her voice carrying a weight of inevitability. You started this. Now, you must finish it. Elias felt the weight of her words pressing down on him. He wasn't sure what terrified him more, the idea of being trapped in Dunbridge forever with these vengeful spirits, or the realization that he was bound to them in a way he could never escape. What do you want from me? He asked, his voice barely audible. Isabel's eyes gleamed with a strange intensity. We want you to lead us. You always were the one who sought power. Now, you have it. The question is, what will you do with it? As the mist thickened and the spirits closed in around him, Elias knew that his return to Dunbridge had been inevitable. But what lay ahead was a choice he had not anticipated. Would he embrace the darkness that had been building in him all these years? Or was there still a chance for redemption, buried beneath the centuries of fear and pain? The fog curled tighter, the spirits whispering in the shadows, as Elias prepared to make his decision. But the answer remained shrouded in the mist. The town of Dunbridge waited. Elias stood frozen in the center of the mist-shrouded square, his mind racing as the ghostly whispers closed in around him. Isabel's words echoed in his thoughts, their weight almost unbearable. He could feel the power coursing through him, the pull of darkness beckoning him to lead these restless spirits. Yet something deep within resisted. For centuries, he had run from this fate, hiding in the shadows, surviving by instinct alone. But now, faced with the culmination of his past sins and choices, he realized that he no longer wanted to be the man or the ghost who sought only power. He had been given strength, yes, but that strength could be used for something far greater than vengeance or control. Isabel's gaze remained locked on his, expectant, as the spirits around them pressed closer. Their presence was overwhelming, a collective hunger for resolution that had festered for centuries. But Elias knew what he had to do. With a deep breath, he raised his hands not in defiance, but in surrender. I won't lead you down this path, he said, his voice calm yet resolute. This cycle of fear and hatred ends here. We've all suffered enough. Isabel's expression flickered, a moment of confusion passing over her features. What are you talking about? This is your chance, our chance to reclaim what was stolen from us. Elias shook his head. No, we were never meant to exist like this. We were never meant to live in this limbo, feeding off the pain of the living. I made a mistake all those years ago, and I won't make it again. The spirits around them seemed to hesitate, their whispers growing softer, uncertain. Elias could feel their unrest, their anger and grief, but beneath it, he sensed something else, something he had never noticed before. They were lost, just like him, trapped, not by their own wills, but by the fear of what lay beyond. What if we don't need to stay? Elias continued, his voice stronger now. What if we can move on, find peace? We've spent centuries running, hiding, fighting. But there's another way. Isabel's eyes narrowed. You think you can just let go? After everything we've been through? Elias stepped closer to her, his form steady, resolute. Yes, I do. Because the power we've gained isn't meant to bind us to this place. It's meant to free us. For a long moment, Isabel was silent, her gaze searching his. The mist swirled around them, heavy with the weight of unspoken emotions. Then, slowly, the hardness in her eyes began to fade. She lowered her head, her shoulders slumping as the years of bitterness seemed to melt away. I've been so angry, she whispered, her voice trembling. I didn't know how to let go. Elias nodded, understanding her pain. Neither did I. But it's time. It's time for all of us to find peace. He turned to the other spirits, who now hovered in the mist, their forms wavering, uncertain. You don't have to stay here, he called out to them. You don't have to be trapped anymore. We can leave this place together. For a long, tense moment, the air was thick with hesitation. Then, one by one, the spirits began to move forward, their expressions shifting from hostility to something more vulnerable, more human. They had all been trapped for so long, clinging to the remnants of their pasts, unable to break free. But now, with Elias's words, a new possibility had emerged. Isabel was the first to step forward, her form flickering as if unsure of itself. How? She asked, her voice small, almost fragile. Elias reached out, his hand hovering near hers, though they could never truly touch. We let go, he said softly. We forgive ourselves for the mistakes we made, and we trust that whatever comes next will be better than this. Slowly, Isabel nodded. Her form grew more transparent, the edges of her figure softening as if she were already fading. The other spirits followed suit, their faces no longer twisted in anger or fear, but softened by the possibility of release. Elias felt the pull again, not the dark, heavy force of power, but a gentle, uplifting sensation. The veil between worlds seemed to shimmer, and for the first time in centuries, he felt a sense of calm wash over him. He had survived, yes, but now, he would truly be free. One by one, the spirits began to dissolve into the mist, their forms rising and vanishing into the ether. Isabel gave Elias a final, bittersweet smile before she faded, her presence lingering for only a heartbeat before she was gone. Elias stood alone in the square, the mist now thinning, the air lighter than it had been in centuries. He took a deep breath, feeling the weight of his past lift from his shoulders. The town of Dunbridge remained quiet, but now it no longer felt like a prison. It was simply a place. With one final glance at the town that had once been his home, Elias turned and walked away, his form growing fainter with each step. He didn't know what awaited him beyond, but for the first time in his long existence, he wasn't afraid. As he faded into the rising dawn, the town of Dunbridge exhaled, its long-forgotten spirits finally at rest. And in the quiet that followed, the wind carried a single word, whispered through the empty streets: peace.